just start off by sort of doing a little presentation on retirement incomes policy, because that's sort of like a key part of our business. I mean, that's what we're all about, trying to help you have a sustainable retirement income. And this is quite a topical issue at the moment with all the tax reform that's happening out there in the community. And today, the government announced its response to the Financial Services System inquiry that was chaired by David Murray. So there's quite a lot of issues out there, and people are probably wondering how all this reform is going to affect them, because it's been some time since we've had any sort of really big changes to the Australian retirement income system. So let's begin that. First, I thought maybe just put a little bit of background. Obviously, we've got an ageing population in Australia. You may not actually really appreciate that, but our birth rate has dropped now to below replacement. So it's currently 1.9, and to replace, we need 2.1. So we depend on immigration to grow. Japan and Germany have a birth rate of about 1.3. And just a statistic that someone quoted to me a little while back was in Japan, more nappies are actually sold to retirees than are sold to babies. So it's just something. Somebody was doing some research on companies that manufacture nappies for babies. It was where I got that from. So we'll hop to the next slide. So Australia has a sort of three-pillar retirement income system. So the first pillar, which has existed for some time, is the age pension. So this is basically a state benefit funded from tax revenue paid to older retirees. Currently you have to be 65, that age is increasing to 67 and is expected to go to 70 by 2035, and it is means tested. Then the next level down, back in the 80s, the Hawke Keating government sort of realised that the current system wasn't sustainable, so then we started to introduce superannuation and the superannuation guarantee legislation and encouraging people to provide for their own retirement. And currently people are forced to put aside 9.5% of their income into superannuation, and that number is expected to increase to 12% over the next 7 years. And then finally, the third pillar are the voluntary contributions that you can put into super up to various caps. So when people think about our system, they sort of look at those three pillars, the age pension and then the two levels of contribution. Then the next slide. Let's look at how much each of these things cost. Now, some people might find some of these slides interesting. The age pension, there's about a bit over 3.5 million people who are over the age of 65 in Australia. And of those people, about 2/3 of them receive the age pension. And approximately 40% of the people over age 65 receive the full age pension, and another sort of 25% receive a sort of partial age pension. There's about sort of 26% of the population over age 65 who don't receive any income support at all from the government. They're either still working or they're self-funded retirees. So that's sort of the current metric. So broadly from this, the age pension actually costs the government a bit over $40 billion a year. If we hop over to the next slide, we'll actually see that number's actually grown. It's currently around 2.5% of GDP, and it's expected to increase to around 3%. So because of this growth, the government recently got a bit tougher on the means testing, and with the impact of the changes that are going to come in 2017, they expect that will bring the cost of the age pension back to about 2.5% of GDP. So that's the age pension side of things. The role of the age pension, obviously it was to alleviate poverty in old age. It's been pushed at about 30% of average weekly earnings. So broadly, how the numbers sort of work, they say to have a modest lifestyle, a single person needs about $23,438. A couple need about $33,799, so they're numbers that come from ASPA. And those numbers are reasonably consistent with the age pension and approximately equal 30% of average weekly earnings. To have a more comfortable lifestyle, a single person needs roughly double those numbers. So a couple probably about 60,000. And to get to these sort of numbers, you probably need to have about $1 million in assets. And by the time you have $1 million in assets, then you're no longer getting the age pension because you failed the means test. So you've got to be pretty much sort of funded to achieve a comfortable lifestyle. We'll just look at the proportion of the population that actually received the age pension. So this has actually been reducing, which sort of shows you the success of the superannuation guarantee levy, where we're getting people to fund for their retirement. So from 2004, these are the people getting the full age pension, and you can see how that line's been dropping down to the dark blue line for 2014. So that's kind of showing there is some success, at least in the early parts of retirement, the under sort of 75 age group, where there's a higher proportion of people who are no longer drawing on the age pension. Just hop to the next slide. So that's the age pension, and so the main thing, remember, there costs the government about $40 billion a year for the age pension. Now then there's various tax concessions that you receive through superannuation. So this is really to do what's called the second and the third pillars. So the first thing is to do with contributions. So this is, if you contribute to super, you're only paying 15% tax on your contributions, whereas if you paid your full marginal tax rate, the government would be collecting an extra $16 billion in revenue. So this is expected to progress up to about $19 billion over the next couple of years. Now the big concession is actually the fact that the earnings inside superannuation are concessionally taxed. And in fact, inside the pension fund, if your fund's in pension mode, you don't pay any tax at all. So if that income was taxed at your marginal tax rate, Treasury estimates they'd get about an extra $13.4 billion of revenue, and this number is expected to double to about $26 billion of revenue. And this is probably the line I like to sort of focus on, because anyone who looks at these numbers, this is the one line that really stands out. They've already sort of had a go at trying to do things with contributions. They've introduced what's called the Division 293 tax. So if your income is more than $300,000, you now pay 30% on your contributions. So the government's actually done some things in this space, but down here in the earnings space, they haven't really done anything at all. And this is maybe an area where they might actually start to do something, particularly when they see the magnitude of these numbers. But other things to remember here too, the cost of these concessions is again around the $40 billion mark, sort of similar to the cost of the age pension. Let's hop to the next slide. This is a slide that was put together by another actuary, Michael Rice. And he was just actually looking at who benefits from all these various tax concessions. And the main thing here is really just to look at the shape of the graph. And he's actually got them in different deciles depending upon your income. So the bottom 10% of income earners, they basically get the age pension. And then the top 10%, well, they're not really getting the age pension. They receive benefits by way of the contribution concessions and the tax-free income on pension. So just sort of shows you roughly how the concessions are sort of distributed across people by various income bands. So what's really happening here is your lower income earners, they obviously benefit from the age pension, and your higher income earners, they benefit from the tax concessions. And what really stands out, if you blow it out a bit further, your top sort of 1 million, your top 5%, they do get quite significant benefits from the tax-free nature of pension income. So that's something that sort of stands out on both sides of politics, that there's quite significant benefits there in terms of the tax-free nature of pension income. Yeah, so that sort of puts a bit of a backdrop. They're sort of the facts, I suppose, that politicians are looking at when they're sort of trying to work out policy in terms of tax reform. And then you have all the dialogue that's going on in the community about people like equity and fairness and, you know, what's a reasonable safety net by way of the age pension. There's quite a bit of conversation going over intergenerational issues. So you've got situations now where you've got grandparents not paying any tax at all on their own earned income, and yet the children are working and they're paying tax on their earned income. So these are sort of the discussions that are going on in politics at the moment. For the really wealthy, a superannuation pension fund can almost be like a tax-free family trust. One of the things, I picked up most of these slides from a Tax Institute forum I had to go to a couple of months ago, and Nick Sherry was there. He's an ex-Labor senator from Tasmania. And he just made the comment that the Australian retirement income system, we actually pay people, whether you're a low income earner or a high income earner, we pay you not to work for 25 years. And so how sustainable is that system? That's kind of evolved over time. If you go back 30 years, I mean, the average retiree probably wasn't keeping along for 25 years, whereas today you are. And so now they're sort of looking at the whole sustainability of this sort of this whole system. So where's this all going to lead us to? And so what sort of reforms are sort of likely to happen? So you probably guess the first thing is, I've kept sort of saying, I think it's only a matter of time before pension investment earnings actually start to be taxed. Now that may be a progressive system. They might say, look, you know, the first 30,000 of income won't get taxed inside your super fund, and then we'll tax the net bit. It might work something like that. I mean, all these issues are sort of gradually being worked out. So They may not come out and just say we're going to tax everything at 10% or everything at whatever. They might actually do some sort of progressive system like that. But I think certainly something's going to happen there. And the other thing is with the age pension, they're going to become more difficult to access. So the eligibility age will sort of keep increasing and the means testing will keep sort of tightening up. Another possibility that might actually happen is the franking credits. They may actually stop refunding the franking credits, and that would be a bit of a shock if that did happen. So they would allow you to use your franking credits and maybe get to carry them forward, but they might actually, maybe they won't return them to you as a cheque, which at the moment helps a lot of people here in terms of their retirement funding. So then what are sort of the implications of all this in terms of what we do and how we sort of think about organising people's affairs and investments and all this sort of stuff? First of all, if they actually do start to tax the income, then this may actually encourage us to have a bit more of a growth bias in terms of how we construct portfolios. So that might mean that we look at trying to get the return to come to you by way of capital gain. And if you hold the investment for more than a year, then you're only paying tax on half of the gain, as opposed to receiving it via income. And this might become the case if they actually compromise the imputation system by denying the refund of franking credits, and that could become even more of a reality there. So if we start to do that, if that actually is an outcome of this, then we might need to look at a strategy to sort of realise profits, or what people actually call to create your own dividend. So we go along with capital gains happening and we sort of try to capture 5% of that every year to sort of add to the income, something sort of like that. Another outcome, depending upon how they structure the taxes, is you want to actually just look at how much money you have in super and how much money you have outside of super, because you want to optimise your tax-through thresholds. So there's no point having everything in super. If they're going to start to tax it, we may put some money outside of super because you can earn, 20, 25,000 a year and not pay tax on that. So we want to look at sort of those sorts of ideas. The whole issue is actually quite complex. There could be some grandfathering, but the whole thing is, obviously, we've got to get onto some sort of sustainable system. Now, what I might actually do, just to finish, I might flick back the earlier slide we had there. In terms of how that might actually affect some people here, I imagine most of the people in the room here are probably around this sort of area here. And it might well be, I think there'll be some things happening up in this area, but it might well be that maybe not much is going to happen here and you may not have much impact at all. I just sort of don't want to alarm people too much. Certainly if you get any age pension, that might get a little bit tougher. Maybe in terms of tax on earnings and superannuation. Most of the people here are actually not getting their fair share of the concessions compared to the people at the different ends of the spectrum. So happy to take some questions if you want to. Got any sort of thoughts or reactions to some of the stuff I've put there?
If these changes are going to come through, when do you think what the time frame will be? Is it in the next government or the next government?
I think it'll probably be the next government. I think they'll probably get a debate sort of happening, and then probably for the next, and then we'll go into the next election and we'll be debating all these issues, and then I think it'll probably get resolved with the next government. I suspect that's probably what will happen there. Yeah. Okay, well, I might hand over to Nicole and we'll get going with the investment committee.